Hello everyone and welcome to SkillCapped. I'm Notorious Dub and today I'm going to be going over the different roles in Valorant. And while there aren't designated roles like in something like League of Legends, everyone on your team has a specific job that they need to be doing to make your team actually be effective. Now this is by far the biggest thing I see losing rounds for everyone from inexperienced players to some pros who just don't do their job for a round. So the roles we will be going over today are Entry Fragger, Second Man, Lurker Flanker, Support, In-Game Leader, and the Operator. And without any of these roles being filled, you'll notice games getting much more difficult than they actually need to be. Before we get started though, make sure you hit that subscribe button because we here at SkillCapped have a ton more comprehensive premium guides designed to help you get to the top of your game and climb those ranks. Alright, first and foremost, we have the Entry Fragger. This is the person that's going to win rounds for your team just by running in first and letting their team follow them in and open up the site for them. Now the Entry Fragger should be the first person making contact with the enemy, but most importantly, they should not be alone. Now I'll talk about your team's job around you as the Entry Fragger, but your job is to make sure that the enemy team is in position to actually follow your entry. Now the most important thing for the Entry Fragger to have is confidence, because a hesitant Entry Fragger routinely throws rounds that are easily winnable. And it also doesn't hurt to have quick, accurate aim because as the Entry Fragger, your job is to peek and clear the most common defender positions. This is because you're running into a completely uncleared site or area, so you have to be ready for the most common areas the enemies are going to be coming from. And focusing on the niche areas that you're scared of slows down the push and often leads to the entry dying to an enemy peeking from one of those common areas and you just blaming it on bad timing. Now the best agents to play here as an Entry Fragger are Phoenix being the best choice, Breach, Reyna, Jett, or anyone who has already used their abilities for the round. Because while Phoenix and Reyna are designed to be Entry Fraggers by nature, you won't always have a clear-cut Entry Fragger on the team or alive. And the most important part of Entry Fragging is that someone on the team is actually doing it. Now the Entry Fragger's job is to run in and die for the team, allowing the team to get the kill, because without an Entry Fragger, we see teams so often sit and wait just before they're able to run into the site, and because no one wants to step up and die, now this allows the entire enemy team to rotate, and by the time someone actually steps up and entries, the entire team runs into a fully stacked site and they die because of it. So all things considered, while there should be one Entry Fragger on the team, if your team doesn't have one, step up and be that person to do it for them, because the most important thing is that someone is doing it, and if you manage to pick up a kill, you're doing way more than your job actually entails. Alright, next up we have the Support, otherwise known as the Second Man. As the Second Man, you have a very simple job: support your Entry Fragger. And while this job is simple, it's often more complicated because you and your Entry Fragger should be essentially attached at the hip, ready to trade kills as soon as the entry actually finds an engagement. And while you should be ready to help the Entry Fragger whenever he finds a fight, you also need to be clearing all of the off angles and unexpected areas because your entry is clearing all of the common areas that he's worried about the most. Now, I know the thought of trusting our random Entry Fragger to clear the common areas makes many of us solo queuers cringe, but this is a 5-man game, and relying on your team to do their job is necessary to actually succeed. Now, the 3 major rules to live by as a Second Man are to clear the angles your Entry Fragger doesn't, trade the kills whenever he dies, and never cross paths with your Entry Fragger until you're safely on site, because the moment you step in front of them, you now become the Entry Fragger. And keep in mind, they are not prepared to trade for you. You are prepared to trade for them. And without incredible synergy, swapping roles mid-push is very difficult. Alright, so the best agents to fill the role of the Second Man are actually Breach, Raze, and Jett for their disruption, kill pressure, and mobility. Or anyone that doesn't have necessary utility that they need to use for the post plan to actually make it work. But much like we talked about with the Entry Fragger, more importantly than who is being the Second Man is that someone is being the Second Man. Because the only thing worse than not having an Entry Fragger is having an Entry Fragger that runs in and dies without having anyone there to trade the kill for him. And next up we have the Lurker or the Flanker, which is arguably the most important role on the entire team. Now this role is the player that's maneuvering around sneakily looking for picks and or weak points in the enemy setup. And the reason this role is so important is because your pushes aren't always going to work first try, and enemies rotate extremely aggressively. So your job is to find the backup plan for your team and cut off the enemy's backup plan. And the job looks a bit different depending on whether you're attacking or defending. And as an attacker, you play more of a lurk position, meaning you're separating from your team, pushing up very slowly, clearing every angle, taking control, and listening for those rotations. Now the most important things to remember when lurking as an attacker is to not let the enemy know that you're there, make sure not to die, and wait until your team is actually pressuring an area to then pressure yourself. Because with you in position, your team doesn't have to worry about the flank as much because the enemies aren't pushing past you. And with you in position, you can often hear the enemy's rotation, which is when you want to push further and take control of that area. Now, successfully pulling this off allows for some incredible flanks on unsuspecting enemies, or just a free site that you're waiting on the enemies to rotate back to once you actually tell your team to rotate to it. But on defender side, your job is to punish the attackers for not watching the flank. Now, the flanker takes the long path around. It gets behind the enemy setup and slows down their pushes because the enemies have to be worried about this push from the flank. And the best example of this is when the attacking team decides to rush B on Haven. Now, this happens so often, and I see this so much. It's when the enemy team rushes B and the player playing A long will push aggressively and make their way into window room. This gets behind all of the defenders and messes up their entire push because they're basically sitting ducks, waiting on people to peek them from both sides. And again, the most important thing when flanking is to wait for the enemy team to show or pressure something, because without the enemy team focusing on something, your odds of dying randomly to a lurk are way higher. And even if you flank and die while the enemies are pressuring, because you're actually slowing down a push and setting a precedent that the enemies have to be watching their flanks, which takes away some of their manpower for their future pushes. So just remember, it's okay to play aggressive if you're on flank and risk dying, because if the enemies are pushing something, they have to take away some of their pressure from that push to actually turn around and take care of you, which opens up so many opportunities for the rest of your team. Alright, next we have the utility or the control characters. These are going to be the characters like Viper, Brimstone, Sage, Cypher, and Omen. And this is going to be Viper, Sage, and Cypher being the true utility or controllers of the actual game. Now, if you're filling the control role, it's important to know what the trouble angles and defender positions are when attacking. These are spots like on A side on split, it's going to be ramps, heaven, and screens. And your job as the utility is to take care of the important angles so the entry and the second man can actually run into the site without being exposed from too many harsh angles. And another vital thing to remember is that your entry and support have to actually be able to clear the site. So smoke paths and over smoking the entire site are a huge no-go. This is because when you go for that plant, you need control of the site so you can actually hold it and defend for the retake. And the utility is the character that you need to be alive to actually execute the round. Now, I see this so often. Brimstones will swing mid solo and die. And even if he gets a kill, he leaves his team in a 4v4. But his team has no smokes at this point to actually isolate a site and actually take control of anything with. And I think at this point, we all know how bad it feels to play around without any smokes whatsoever. And then we have the controller, usually just on defender side, because their job is to control and lock down one vital area of the map. Now, as a controller, the biggest thing I see going wrong is wasting their utility. I'm sure we've all seen the Sage immediately wall mid on split or bind. And this either results in the enemy shooting it immediately or waiting for it to expire, which ends up being the enemy team rushing a site or an area only to find a Sage with no way to actually stop them from coming in. Now, the best way to play as a controller is to get as much information as possible and as safely as possible, and make sure not to waste your utility early. Now, obviously dying with your utility still up is even worse, but wait until the enemy overcommits to something so your utility can actually split up the enemy team or force them to stop their commitment, wasting even more time from them. Because the goal here is to stall out the enemy team enough or force them into a bad spot where you can actually pick them off one by one and turn the round in your favor. And then next up, we have the in-game leader. This is going to be the brains of the entire operation. And while they can fill any of the other roles as well, they are designated to be the strat caller. This is so important because the team needs to move as a cohesive unit. This requires them to have one voice to listen to. Now, obviously, everyone on your team needs to be communicating and calling out, but you have to allow the in-game leader to call when to buy, rotate, and what strategy to use. And even if you don't agree with the call, it's better to do the wrong thing as a team than to do the right thing and let your team die without you. Now, obviously, if it's not a pressing issue, feel free to input, but in hectic situations, just follow the calls because the team has to be able to rely on you and you have to be able to rely on them. Now, the in-game leader should communicate clearly, have map awareness, and be able to think on their feet and not just rely on predefined strategies. And honestly, I think this is something that we should clear up at the very beginning of all of our games. Ask, does anyone want to be the in-game leader or strat caller? And if not, you can feel free to take up that role. Now, if you're trying to become the in-game leader, be confident and clear and pay attention to that mini-map, because the only way to improve is to actually practice. Now finally, I feel like it's necessary to talk about the operator, because it's such a force to actually deal with in almost every elo and every game. And the operator is the designated sniper for the team. Now the opera could be the person trying to lock down a site solo, hold control of a crucial point of the map, or go for aggressive angles early to get that opening pick. And either way, the most important thing for the operator is to leave themselves an area to fall back to. I see so many operator players hold a very aggressive angle on defense, only to die to the second man because they have nowhere to hide and no corner to actually fall back to. And this is precisely what makes Jett such a good opper, because she can go for those aggressive solo picks and be able to get much farther back to safety than most agents. And when it comes to opping, it's important to let your teammates know what your goal is for the round. You're going to want to be constantly swapping up your peaks and angles so you don't get smoked off and become useless, so you have to keep your team updated on what you're trying to do. Now an example of this would be like deciding to play Heaven on Bind and letting your team know whether you're watching showers or short. Now something as simple as this and letting them know whenever you swap from watching that area lets your team know not to worry about that area as much and just focus on the other, keeping you much safer and able to focus on your spot and get that first kill whenever they peek. Now, while not all teams need an operator is an invaluable tool for the team to actually utilize, provided it's in the right hands. Now, the best choices for operating are Jett to play aggressively, and Sage and Cypher for their site hold potential. And then a couple of honorable mentions to Raze for her satchel peaks that are actually really aggressive, and Viper provided she doesn't have her ult, because if she has her ult, she's much better suited with some rifle or some shotgun. Now, all in all, the most important thing when it comes to your role and your agent is to coordinate with your team. We see the most success come from teams who are so good at playing in pairs and letting their operator do their thing. And whenever they make a decision for what they want to do for that round, they immediately swap into these roles and take control of their site. But let me know in the comments below which role you think is the most important and what you want to see next. As always, we here at SkillCapped want to thank you for watching, and make sure you hit that subscribe button with bells on so you can stay up to date with these comprehensive premium guides, keeping you up to date and ahead of the pack. Now I just want to say thank you for spending this little bit of your day with us, and I'm Notorious Dub, signing off.